We tend to think of history as this fixed thing, right? A story that's already been written down in a book somewhere. But what if it's not? What if history is actually a living, breathing process that's always changing? And what if the real engine of that change isn't agreement, but contradiction? That's what we're digging into today. How the clash between myth and science, between a good story and hard evidence, completely reshapes how we see the past. And to kick things off, let's start with this really powerful idea from the philosopher Voltaire. He's basically saying that contradiction isn't some bug in the system, it is the system. It's this essential tension that makes the world go round. And for our purposes, it's the very thing that keeps history moving forward. So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the philosophical engine that drives historical change. Then we'll dive into 3 incredible case studies where a story we've been told for ages slams right into new evidence. We're talking about the famous Siege of Masada, the incredible city of Great Zimbabwe, and a very personal secret of an American founding father. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by asking, hey, why does any of this actually matter? All right, to really get a grip on how history works, we need a special kind of tool, a way of seeing the past not as a straight line from A to B, but as this dynamic, messy, and fascinating struggle. And that tool is called the historical dialectic. The philosopher Hegel is the guy most famous for this idea. He imagined history as this grand, unfolding conversation where we, as a society, get smarter by wrestling with our own internal contradictions. It's almost like a 3-step dance that pushes us all forward. And here's how that dance works. You start with the thesis. That's the status quo, the way things are, a stable idea. But then, along comes the antithesis, a challenge, a reaction, a direct contradiction to that first idea. And here's the cool part. When they clash, they don't just destroy each other. They create a synthesis, which is a brand new, more complex idea that takes the best parts of both. And then that new synthesis becomes the next thesis, and the whole cycle starts over. That is the engine of history. Okay, so let's fire up this engine and see how it works in the real world with our first case study. And here, the contradiction is a major collision between a sacred ancient text and some seriously cool 21st century tech. For almost 2,000 years, the story of Masada has been this epic tale of heroism and a fight to the last breath. But if you ask one simple question, how long did this famous siege actually take? You uncover a huge gap between the legend and the physical evidence. And here it is, plain and simple. The historian Flavius Josephus, who is our only real written source, paints this picture of a brutal 3-year-long siege. It's a story that's become a huge part of modern Israeli identity. But recent scientific analysis using drones and 3D modeling of the Roman earthworks tells a completely different story. The whole thing, from building the ramp to the final assault, was probably over in just a few weeks. And when you dig into the details, the story just keeps clashing with the science. Josephus talks about this heroic mass suicide of 960 people. But after tons of excavations, there are no mass graves on the mountaintop. He says the defenders were passive, just waiting for the end. But archaeologists have found huge rolling stones and arrowheads, clear proof that they were fighting back hard. The myth is a long, glorious last stand. The archaeology points to a quick, violent, and brutal Roman victory. Okay, for our next case, we're heading to southern Africa. And this one is a little different. The contradiction here wasn't just an accident or a misinterpretation. It was a myth that was built on purpose to prop up a colonial ideology. So when European colonists and explorers first stumbled upon the incredible stone city of Great Zimbabwe, they had a problem. In their minds, based on the racist ideas of the time, there was just no way that a local African society could have built something so sophisticated. So what did they do? Did they question their own prejudice? Nope. They just invented a whole new history out of thin air. And the stories they came up with were, frankly, wild. They claimed it had to have been built by outsiders. Maybe it was the Queen of Sheba. Or perhaps it was the mythical land of Ophir from the Bible, where King Solomon got his gold. Others guessed it was Persians or Arabs who got lost. These weren't just innocent guesses. They were arguments designed to erase African history and justify colonial control. But the stones themselves tell a very different story. Decades of careful archaeological work have proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of the local Shona people. Everything, the style of the masonry, the pottery, the cultural artifacts, points to a powerful, wealthy, and brilliant local African civilization. So the contradiction here is crystal clear. It's a racist ideology
versus the undeniable scientific facts. For our final example, let's bring it closer to home and look at a conflict that gets right to the heart of the American story. This is a contradiction that played out for centuries, a battle between official denial and the undeniable truth found in our very own genes.
So, rumors about a relationship between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman who was also his late wife's half-sister, started swirling way back in 1802. But for almost 200 years, the official story from mainstream historians was no way. It was dismissed as a political smear, a vicious lie. All the while, the oral history passed down through the Hemings family, which insisted on their direct lineage from Jefferson, was completely ignored.
This timeline really shows you what a long, slow fight it was. You have the first report in 1802. Then, more than 150 years later, historians like Fawn Brodie start to seriously challenge the official denial. But the real earthquake hit in 1998. That's when DNA science stepped in and proved a genetic match between the Jefferson male line and a descendant of Sally Hemings' son, Eston. It was the smoking gun. And 20 years after that, even the foundation that runs Jefferson's estate officially called it a settled historical matter. The long-held denial had finally crashed headfirst into DNA.
So, we've looked at a Roman siege, an African city, and a founding father's secret. What's the common thread here? What's the big takeaway from all these stories? Why should we care about these fights over the past? Because as we've seen, history isn't just a list of things that happened. It's a battlefield. It's an active struggle over our collective memory, over identity, and really over who gets to hold the power to tell the official story. The version of the past we choose to believe in fundamentally shapes who we are today. And in every one of our case studies, that clash, that contradiction created a new synthesis, a richer, more complicated, and truer understanding. For Masada, the story is now less of a simple myth and more a complex story about a devastatingly efficient Roman army. For Great Zimbabwe, it's a powerful story of reclaimed African history. And for Jefferson, it means facing a much more complicated legacy, one that finally gives recognition to Sally Hemings and her children. In the end, what this all shows us is that studying history really is studying contradiction. And that leaves all of us with a final question to think about. What are the sacred stories of your own history? Your countries, your communities, maybe even your own families? What are the truths you've always taken for granted? And what fascinating contradictions might be hiding right underneath the surface?